Hi everyone! In this video I will explain my coloring process. I am using Clip Studio Paint, but it should be able to be done in other programs with layers and layer modes. I start by selecting all the areas outside the line art and invert the selection to automatically color in the line art. I use one base color, usually grey. I will add the actual flat colors on separate layers, click to the base color layer. First I color the skin. I use the bucket tool and refer to other areas to automatically fill in the area. I like to add blush and color around the eyes to give the face more definition. I want the skin to have warm undertones, so I'm using orange for the blush. When I want to achieve a cold undertone, I use pink or red. At this stage, I also add a dark shadow on the neck. I like to add a bluish tone inside while leaving the edges more warm. I create another layer on top and color the eyes. I like to use two contrasting colors, one at the bottom and one at the top. Then I add a shadow using the top color with an airbrush set to multiply mode. I draw a light bluish highlight on one side at the top to simulate light reflection on the eyeball. On the opposite side I make highlights as white dots. I also add a lighter color on the bottom and edge of the shadow. I use the RGB color slider to make them more yellow or red, to add some more color variations. Next, I make a layer for the hair. I create it below the skin layer to make filling in the gaps more convenient. When there are colorful streaks, I like to blend the colors and adjust the border using the RGB slider. Here I added more red on the outer border and more blue on the inside. Then I select the underside and use an airbrush on soft light mode and color with a light blue. This will create some depth in the hair. Last thing I do is use the airbrush around the face with the skin color, to make the difference between the face and the hair less harsh. I like to blend the colors a bit to make them look more seamless. In reality, colors are often affected by the colors of the objects next to them due to the light bouncing off. I tend to avoid big blocks of a single color and add a gradient to add some color variation. Each next layer I create will be below the layer I worked on previously. The exception are patterns on clothing, which I draw on a separate layer above the clothing color, to be able to alter them freely. To achieve a metallic look, I add dark shadows and highlights. I make cool toned highlights on one side and warm toned on the other side. Whenever I want to create depth, like on the tail or the cape, I use an airbrush and color with a light blue on soft light mode, to make things look further away. When coloring the background, I want the colors to look cohesive with the color scheme of the character. At the same time, I don't want the background to take away the focus from the character, so I use less contrast and lighter colors. Once the flat colors are finished, I begin to work on lighting. The first thing I do is create a layer set to multiply mode to add a shadow on top of everything. I chose a brown shadow because the warm tones will contrast with all the greens in the flat colors. Next, I draw the lighting on a layer on Add Glow mode. I like this mode the best because it both makes the colors lighter and also more saturated. But I have to lower the opacity to around 50%, otherwise the light would be pure white. I like to use lighting to enhance the shape language and separate the character from the background. I first block out the areas with a hard brush, and then on the same layer use an airbrush around the edges to soften them and add a glow effect. Next, I lock transparency and make an outline using a darker and vibrant color. For sunlight, I use either orange or red, but you can use any color depending on the desired effect. Last thing I do is add a light gradient from the top of the drawing on a layer set to overlay mode. I do all these steps separately for the character and the background. For the background, I also added another gradient from the bottom to make the character stand out. Once the lighting is done, I start working on the shading. I do it on a layer set on multiply mode. I avoid using pure grey as the shading color because it makes the colors look washed out. Use a slightly pink color to get a more saturated look. While I mostly use the same color throughout, I do change it when shading skin, since it needs to be more vibrant. I also use varying values to add multiple levels of shading. To make it slightly more interesting, I use a reddish outline on the border by sliding the R value on the RGB slider, and add a blue tint on the inside by sliding the B value. Shading clothing is more of a trial and error process for me, but I recommend drawing the clothing folds as triangular shapes. When I want the fabric to look more fine and flowy, I add more shadows. When I shade fur, I like to make the shadows follow the markings. Although it's not really realistic, it looks nice and adds more definition. The last step is highlights. I make them on a layer on add glow mode. Use a dark blue color and add lighting using a hard brush, creating an outline on the opposite side of the lighting source. This simulates light bouncing off and makes the things covered in shadows stand out more. I also add some more highlights on stuff like hair, clothing, and metal parts. I pretty much repeat the same process for the background, just a bit more simplified, and focus on the difference between light and shadow to add more visual interest to the background. I don't have much advice for shading leaves, but I try to reinforce the leaf veins with shadows and add highlights. I decided to add some more greenery behind the leaves, which helped to bring in some of the teal accents from the character to the background. Last thing, which is more of a bonus step, is using gradient maps. They work kind of like filters and help achieve some really cool effects. I mainly use ones made by Pio, who is a great artist and one of my inspirations. Another finishing touch is changing the color of the line art by switching it to multiply mode and making it some other color. So that's pretty much my coloring process. I hope you found it useful. Please let me know in the comments if you want me to make more tutorials. Thank you for watching and bye bye!